Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to try something that I've never tried before in terms of a video. This is something I've done in podcasts and live streams on YouTube and Twitch, but I've never actually sat down to have this kind of discussion in a video. But I think now is the perfect time to do it with some things that have kind of emerged in the early shaping of TEPPEN's new meta. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to kind of open the field and discuss this topic a little bit while I throw some relevant gameplay in the background to the subjects that I'm talking about. If this stuff sounds interesting to you, I would encourage you to stick around. But if you are just here on the Stout Helm channel for just decks and news and updates, this video may not be for you. But if you love TEPPEN as much as I do, then this specific discussion and the topics I'm going to talk about are relevant to you, so I would encourage you to stick around. My idea for this as a jumping off point all really started with one match in particular that I played and then tweeted about and kind of fostered some discussion that I think would be some really interesting points to include. If you watched my Denjin Ryu deck update video from earlier this week, you saw that match. It was specifically the last match in that video where I played Denjin Ryu against this version of Rakoha for Zero. Now this deck style is very specific. A lot of people are calling it the Exodia deck because you're looking for key pieces to get your win condition combo. Specifically that being Ceasefire and X Hunters when you've hit your memory threshold. If you're not familiar with what this deck does, it is a lot of stalling. It's playing a lot of really cheap actions, these new purple MP boosting cards to build up your memory, to bounce your opponent's units and just stall until you get X Hunters so you can throw that down with maximum memory for maximum value. And then if you need to, lock your opponent's board with Ceasefire so there's absolutely nothing they can do about it. This deck is really popular in ranked, so if you're in Champion, you've probably seen this at some point before. I can't really speak for A rank because I hit Champion pretty early this season and I haven't had a lot of experience in the A bracket. The two tweets in particular that I started with read as follows. This new Zero deck that just bounces, negates, and weakens to cycle through the entire deck just to get the legendary purple action is so unfun to play against. I've preached about how TEPPEN becoming a slower game defeats the purpose of why the foundation of the game is so freaking good. I really hope this doesn't become a trend for this expansion. What are your thoughts on the speed of play in TEPPEN? If you follow me on Twitter, or if you've watched any of my live streams, this is something that shouldn't be unfamiliar to you. I've held this opinion for the past two expansions. TEPPEN originally caught my eye because it's a real-time card game, which is almost unheard of in the remainder of the genre. It's generally a fast game that requires you to think on your feet, and not just necessarily sit there and think on your turn like many traditional card games. That's what immediately drew me in. Also my love of Capcom properties. So when the game came out in July of 2019, I really enjoyed it because those values were definitely prevalent in the game. Now I'm not saying that the meta at that point was perfect because Resonate was a thing back then. There was a lot of Shinku Ryu and green was considered a joke. In a lot of situations. Also, the pre-nerf spike launch for Nergigante. So no, the game's meta wasn't perfect back then, but the thing that I really enjoyed was that it actually was a fast-paced game, and only very rarely, in certain situations, mainly the mirror matches between Resonate decks, would actually go to the 5-minute mark or as close to the 5-minute mark as you can get. And I really enjoyed that. I like being able to end matches, not necessarily within the span of 30 seconds, because I think there is an element of aggressive rushdown decks that can become very unfun. I am transparent in that. As much as I love to play that rushdown playstyle, I'm very aware that it's not engaging or exciting for a player to lose a match in 30 seconds and not really have any form of an idea of what they could have done differently. That's the biggest thing for me in terms of fighting games and card games, and I would say is a big barrier of entry for a lot of players of varying degrees of skill levels. And that is, I just got my butt slapped and I have no clue how I could have avoided it. Now, a lot of this practice comes with watching replays, practicing with other players, and just in general honing your skills and getting better. And that is an element of this game. It's very possible for you to get stomped by a deck in a situation where you could have overcome it, but you're just not used to it, you don't have that solid mindset, or you just don't have the matchup experience. And that's okay. Because it is on the player to, if they want to improve, to make those strides and get better. But there is a limit to, what those sort of things can overcome. So that's what was popular in core. And then we got the Day of Nightmares, where things changed a little bit differently. That's when Wrath Awoken Rathalos became really popular. Games were ending in 30 to 45 seconds because of that hero art that didn't scale at the time. So if you just had tons and tons of attack point buffs, you were buffing one flying monster, you swing with something with combo, and boom, there goes 30 life. And it was really, really easy to achieve. And one of the reasons that that specific red-green Rathalos deck was so popular. Fours with Morgan was also really popular because it could actually deal very well with what Rathalos did. And then Mono Black was there because Mono Black's always been there in some facet. And Resonate was there, but that's kind of when it began to fall off a little bit because Fours was just the better deck. Then we got to the Devil's Awaken when Nero came out and we were introduced to the growth mechanic, which allowed green to become a lot better. But a lot of those cards in that set really lended themselves to the big Resonate purple decks. And this was the same meta that was being developed around the TEPPEN World Finals of 2019 that happened in mid-December. If you don't remember, the finals of that tournament was actually two players who had both selected big Resonate purple decks for their final decks in grand finals. And while the event was spectacular, the production values were superb, it was very entertaining to watch. I stayed up all night with a group of guys watching it, and it was a great time. It says a lot about the state of the meta when everybody is picking Resonate, or at least some form of Resonate, and then your secondaries here and there. Yawn was kind of becoming more popular then. A lot of people were picking Jill, a lot of Wesker, some Ryu, you get the idea. That's when there was a lot of backlash. Players wanted big Resonate to go away. Surge of Demonic Power, if you remember that card, was incredibly popular. It allowed for huge Resonate combos that were almost impossible to overcome, and it allowed Resonate decks to snowball out of control, be super fast, and then close out those games. So when the Force Seekers was announced and we got the new Ascension mechanic, people were hopeful that Resonate would kind of go away. It would allow more decks to flourish, and it would allow more decks to compete. Because I think one thing that a lot of players can agree on is whether they are fans of the green heroes, the red heroes, purple, black, it doesn't matter. They want a variety of decks to be able to succeed. I am a firm believer that almost all of you guys, and even players who don't watch my videos, believe that. I don't think there's hardly anybody out there who just wants to say, I just want one or two decks to succeed. A variety would be amazing, and a diverse meta is something that, I really, really hope for, but a lot of factors go into that. So in my opinion, the Force Seekers was kind of a step down from where TEPPEN had kind of solidified itself. The Force Seekers, the meta revolving around Yawn Lee, because the Ascension mechanic lended itself so well to the Yawn hero art, which gave an abundance of MP and allowed those green decks to snowball out of control. Now, because Yawn was so popular, that kind of forced the rise of Mono Black. And the reason that happened was because Mono Black had a pretty decent matchup against Yawn Lee, and not a lot of decks did. And a lot of those black cards are very overtuned for what they do. I'm talking about Alexia Ashford, Fate of the Unworthy. There's so many more. Even the Tyrant into the Super Tyrant, which came out before that. These cards offer an insane amount of value. And that deck was naturally became popular to combat Yawn, and there were other decks, kind of here and there. Jill was there to a degree. Nero's kind of nowhere to be found. Akuma is making strides in a few different decks. Purple and black for the aggressive flight-based rushdown. Mono black for something a little more mid-range, more control-y. You get the idea. I said often through the course of the Force Seekers 2 seasons from the beginning of January to now that I was really ready for big meta changes, and I wanted the game to kind of pick up the pace a little bit and to become a lot more diverse. Because, you know, just seeing Yawn and variations of the same mono black deck, because for the most part they were all the same, I was ready for some diversity. And so Zero comes out, and Zero is here, and Zero is without a doubt the best purple hero in the game. I would say he's top 3 heroes in the game just because his hero arts are so diverse and so powerful. Now, with the Haunted by Memories expansion that came with Zero, we also got the new mechanic of Memory, which you guys should know this by now if you've watched a few of my videos, but if you're not familiar, Memory is just a counter for the number of action cards you have used throughout a match. Each action you use, the counter goes up, and there are certain cards that get more powerful if you hit a certain number for your Memory. So a lot of these decks that we have now are much more action-centric than they've ever been. Actions, as you know, prompt something called active response, where the clock stops and it gives players the opportunity to exchange action cards during this frozen in time moment. Because Memory is so popular and so good, this is being used quite often. So a lot of matches in general, in my opinion, are becoming a lot slower. That allows us to circle back to this Zero deck in particular, that is focused on just controlling the field, keeping your opponent's board empty until they get their combo pieces and they have enough memory to drop these 2 cards in particular. They've got Rakoha on deck for insane amounts of spread damage, and it's cheap because it's only 16 AP, and they just close out those games. I'm a firm believer that this deck in particular that we're talking about is currently the best deck that is seeing play. Now, the meta is still developing. I'm well aware of that. This is still very early in this meta cycle, but I do think it is worth talking about the pace of the game in terms of the state of play when it comes to TEPPEN. Now, those 2 tweets I shared before, I encourage people to, give me their opinions on kind of the state of play, what decks are popular, and if they're kind of happy with how things are shaping up in terms of this meta. So here's a few of the responses that I got. Neon Craze is the awesome guy who runs TEPPEN Lexicon. It's a fantastic website. He tweeted at me and he said, quote, "I hate how much of a checkmate move it is, but I appreciate that it's a win condition that requires solid execution. Hopefully we get more options to deal with it, but at the same time, more ways to play the game with elaborate decks along those lines." Durian IRL also responded. He says, quote, "This is one of the biggest concerns I had right when they said it would be an action-based set. Actions mean less interaction with my opponent, which leads to less fun gameplay. I hope this set will help the devs understand that." Zekin Bailey says, quote, "I've tried it and it's not very fun to play either. You get constant mirror matches of spamming actions. If it's not a mirror match, then you just sit there waiting while he wastes 10 minutes, initiating active response every 3 seconds, unamused emoji face." I recognize that most of these tweets kind of agree with my point of view, but it's fair to look at the other side of the coin. The people who are fans of a slower style of gameplay and a slower meta, which many believe encourages more thoughtfulness that goes into these games. They believe that less brain-dead decks will become popular. You get the idea. I'm not going to put words in any particular player's mouths because I've had these conversations, but I'm not trying to put anybody on blast for their opinion on this game because they are just as entitled to it as I am. So those are the 2 sides of the coin. Whether people prefer the more active, really fast-paced game that TEPPEN, in my opinion, was closer to when it came out, or the state of the game now, which is a lot slower, arguably maybe more methodical. Those are the 2 sides of the coin. Personally, I wish the game would get a little bit faster, but what I really want to know is what you guys think. The whole point of this video is I wanted to foster some more discussion on this topic. And just let me know what you think of this style of video. I realize it's a much more relaxed experience than I normally provided, but I wasn't really sure about how to start this discussion without doing it in this style. So let me know what I can do differently. I love you guys. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel, if you want more TEPPEN stuff, because I provide a ton of it every single week. Thank you so much for your time, your support, and all of your kind words. I hope you have a great rest of your week.